Trevor here, and today we look at the scariest Bigfoot sightings ever recorded. From a veteran hunter who filmed Bigfoot wrestling a bear, to an investigator reviewing trail camera footage who begins to realize Bigfoot staring back at the camera may have known it was being watched the entire time. I've been hunting elk in the Flathead National Forest for most of my adult life. I was 38 years old in October 2016 and had been sitting in tree stands in that terrain since I was old enough to carry a rifle without falling over. I climbed up before first light, 5:30 a.m., and settled in to wait. The tree stand was positioned to overlook the entire meadow, giving me clear sight lines in all directions. I turned the camera on at first light out of habit. That habit is the reason I have what I have. By 6:30, the mist was thinning and the light was good. The October morning was crisp, probably around 35 degrees, with frost still visible on the grass in the meadow below. I was watching the gap in the rocky outcropping when I heard it, crashing from the tree line to my left, maybe 80 yards out. Not the particular lightness of a deer moving through underbrush. Something heavy, something very heavy, moving fast, and not particularly concerned with being quiet about it. Just then, the grizzly broke through the tree line. I'd seen grizzlies in the field before, but not often at that proximity, and not like this one. He was a mature male. I estimated he weighed 800 pounds based on his shoulder hump and overall dimensions, which I could later measure against the tree trunks and meadow grass in the footage. This wasn't just a large bear. This was a massive specimen, the kind of grizzly that commands respect from every other animal in the forest. The shoulder hump was prominent enough to be visible from 60 yards. His coat was dark with age, grizzled and thick for the approaching winter. His claws were clearly visible even from my position, curved, yellowish, at least 4 inches long on the front paws. He was moving with the particular agitation of a bear that had been disturbed from something rather than simply traveling through. Head swinging side to side, pace uneven, not foraging behavior, distressed movement. I watched him through the binoculars and tried to identify what had set him off. Bears in this terrain have a layered response to threats. There's bear behavior when they smell something unfamiliar. There's bear behavior when they've encountered something that has made them reassess their position in the local hierarchy. This was the second kind. I found out why 40 seconds later. Bigfoot stepped out of the tree line at 6:45 a.m., approximately 40 yards behind the grizzly. The creature was 8.5 to 9 feet tall. I ranged it against the lodgepole pines at the tree line edge. Trees I knew from prior seasons were in the 30-foot range, and the creature's head reached a point on those trunks that placed its height at 8.5 feet minimum, possibly closer to 9 feet, depending on how deep into the tree line it had emerged from. The sheer size of this thing was overwhelming. I'd heard estimates of Bigfoot's height before, but seeing it in person and measuring it against known reference points made the scale almost incomprehensible. The hair was dark reddish-brown, dense, and long enough to mat across the shoulders and upper arms in the direction of movement. The texture looked coarse, almost like a bear's winter coat, but longer and more flowing. The shoulders were wide enough that the silhouette, at first light through the mist, looked wrong, too broad for the height, asymmetric in a way that took me a moment to process as real rather than a trick of the light. The muscle definition was clearly visible even through the thick hair covering. The face was visible through my binoculars at 60 yards. I've been asked to describe it many times since, and the honest answer is that what struck me most was not the anatomy, the flat nose, the heavy brow ridge, the pronounced jaw structure, but the expression. There was intelligence there, calculation, purpose. The creature was looking at the grizzly with a quality of focused attention I now recognize as intentional, not startled, not reactive. Bigfoot had been tracking that bear. Whatever had agitated the grizzly enough to produce that distressed, side-swinging march through the tree line at 6:44 a.m. was walking 30 feet behind it, deliberately following it into this confrontation. Bigfoot began walking toward the grizzly, not running, and walking with the same deliberate, heavy-footed stride that I would watch it use throughout the next 14 minutes. Each step was purposeful, calculated. The grizzly turned. The two animals faced each other across roughly 40 feet of open meadow. The grizzly rose on its hind legs. I've seen bears do this many times. A grizzly on its hind legs is an animal making itself as large as possible, attempting to resolve a confrontation through display rather than contact. A mature male grizzly at full height is approximately 8 feet tall and 800 pounds, which is enough to end most confrontations before they begin. The roar that came with the display was the loudest sound that Meadow had produced all morning. It carried across the entire basin and flushed a pair of ravens from the far tree line. The sound echoed off the surrounding ridges, a primal challenge that should have sent any reasonable creature retreating. But Bigfoot was not impressed. The creature roared back. I had heard bear vocalizations, wolf howls, elk bugles, mountain lion screams. I had heard most of the sounds these mountains produce. I had not heard anything like what came out of Bigfoot at 6:46 a.m. It was lower in register than the grizzly's roar, more resonant, with a quality that I can only describe as structured. It had a beginning, a sustained middle, and a deliberate end, like something produced, with intention rather than released on reflex. The vocalization seemed to come from deep in the chest cavity, powerful enough that I felt it as much as heard it. The grizzly dropped back to all fours. Bigfoot kept walking. Before this goes any further, I found additional material from that morning while filming this. I attached the footage, field notes, and documentation. Some of it was taken down, and I never managed to upload it here. However, it's all in the file that's linked in the description. Read at your own risk. Now, at 6:47 a.m., the grizzly made the decision. He charged, dropped to all fours, oriented his body mass toward Bigfoot, and covered 30 feet of meadow at a speed I knew from experience was fast enough to be fatal before a person could complete a response. A charging grizzly can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour, and watching 800 pounds of muscle and fury accelerate across open ground is one of the most terrifying sights in nature. I had my camera running and my hands were shaky, very shaky. Meanwhile, I had something else move around me, far from the fight, but I couldn't tell what it was. Somehow, though, it felt like something else was watching. But Bigfoot got my attention again, and this time it was with a scream. As it screamed, Bigfoot planted its feet. It didn't sidestep. It didn't back up. It stood in the path of an 800-pound bear at full charge and waited, and then, at the last possible moment before contact, it got both hands up and took the grizzly's head between them. The impact was audible, not the slap of a deflection, the deep percussive thud of two objects of significant mass colliding and transferring force. Bigfoot's feet left the ground briefly due to the momentum, but the grip held. Both massive hands had the bear's skull between them, fingers deep into the fur, and as the grizzly's momentum carried them both toward the charge, Bigfoot twisted. The force applied to the grizzly's neck during that redirect was enough that I heard the bear vocalize in pain, a sharp, compressed sound completely different from the roar that had preceded the charge. The grizzly stumbled past. Its front legs buckled from the torque, and it went down on one knee before scrambling back to its feet and spinning to face Bigfoot again. The bear's right front paw swung in a counterattack, connecting with Bigfoot's chest. 4 parallel gashes opened through the reddish-brown hair and across the skin beneath. I could see the blood from 60 yards, dark against the lighter area of chest hair below the wounds. The claws had gone deep, cutting through what must have been thick hide to reach muscle beneath. Bigfoot's response was immediate. It drove a knee into the grizzly's ribcage. The impact sound reached me clearly across the meadow. The bear stumbled sideways. They separated, both standing, both bleeding. The grizzly was reassessing, and so was I. I heard a strange sound again, this time louder, like something was racing towards me. However, I quickly shrugged it off. What I had just watched was Bigfoot absorb a direct hit from a grizzly bear charge, maintain grip under that impact, apply enough rotational force to injure the bear during the redirect, and respond to a claw strike, not by retreating, but by delivering a counter-strike. This wasn't just brute strength, it was tactical fighting intelligence. I had 30 seconds to process that before the second charge came in. The grizzly came back at 6:48, lower this time, faster, head down, and aimed at Bigfoot's legs rather than the body. The bear was adapting, learning from the first failed attack. Bigfoot sidestepped and delivered a hammering downward blow with the right fist to the back of the grizzly's skull, just behind the ear. The bear's head snapped forward and its front legs shot out from under it, dropping onto its knees. The sound of that strike, delivered from full extension, using the creature's falling body weight through the arm, was the loudest single impact of the entire fight. Bigfoot grabbed the grizzly while it was down, one hand at the scruff of the neck, one hand at the base of the tail. What happened next, I watched twice in the footage before I accepted what I was seeing. Bigfoot lifted an 800-pound grizzly bear off the ground and threw it approximately 8 feet sideways. The bear's body left the ground completely, all 4 paws airborne, before it hit the earth and rolled, raising a visible cloud of meadow frost and disturbed grass. The grizzly came up snarling. It hurt, but it was not done. At 6:49, the grizzly changed strategy. Instead of charging high and direct, the bear came in low and fast and tackled Bigfoot at the waist, using its mass as a battering ram, driving its shoulder into Bigfoot's midsection and taking both of them to the ground. Bigfoot landed on its back with the grizzly on top, and the bear immediately went for the throat. Jaws open, driving down toward Bigfoot's neck. Bigfoot got both hands up and caught the grizzly's lower jaw. What I watched for the next several seconds is very disturbing, I must warn you. A 750-pound bipedal primate on its back with an 800-pound grizzly bear pressing down on it, the bear's jaws 3 inches from its throat, held back by 2 hands gripping bone, and neither of them moving. Bigfoot's arms were fully extended, shaking from the strain of holding the grizzly's head back. The bear's hind legs were churning against Bigfoot's abdomen and legs, claws tearing through the skin, blood appearing across Bigfoot's lower body. This lasted approximately 20 seconds. Then Bigfoot twisted its entire body, a full lateral rotation from the hips, generating torque the way a person rolls out from under a weight, and took the grizzly with it. The bear lost its footing and went sideways. They separated, and both got to their feet, and when they were standing again, I could see the damage from the ground. Exchange. Bigfoot was bleeding heavily from the claw wounds across the abdomen and legs. The grizzly had blood at the corner of its mouth from the jaw contact and was moving its head side to side in the way bears do when they've absorbed a head impact. They circled each other at about 10 feet, both breathing in the hard, rhythmic cadence of extreme exertion. Bigfoot's chest was rising and falling visibly with each breath. The grizzly's shoulders were hunched, its movements slower than they had been at the start of the fight. 4 minutes of sustained combat at that intensity had cost both of them, and what I was watching in those 20 seconds of circling was both animals reassessing what was still available to them. It was 6:50 a.m., but what happened at 6:51 changed everything. The strange sound I had heard before became real. It was not a wolf or a coyote. It was Dogman, approximately 7 feet tall, moving on 2 legs, upright bipedal stride, faster than Bigfoot moved, faster than the grizzly had charged. The body was covered in grayish-brown fur, shorter and less dense than Bigfoot's hair. The proportions were different from Bigfoot, narrower through the shoulders, longer in the limb-to-body ratio, with a backward-jointed structure in the lower leg that I now recognize as digitigrade, walking on its toes rather than flat-footed like Bigfoot. The hands showed individual fingers with what appeared to be both human-like dexterity and canine claws. The head was the part that took me the longest to process. Elongated snout, pointed ears that moved independently, visible fangs, but intelligence in the eyes that was unmistakably predatory and calculating. Dogman came out of the east tree line at full speed, and it was not heading for the grizzly. It was heading for Bigfoot. The grizzly watched it come. The bear was close enough that Dogman passed within 15 feet of it at full sprint. The grizzly did not react. No threat display, no charge, no movement. The bear that had been fighting Bigfoot for 4 minutes, with everything it had simply watched the Dogman pass. It was as if the grizzly recognized that Bigfoot was the common enemy, or perhaps it simply understood that this new creature posed no threat to it specifically. At 6:51, Dogman launched itself at Bigfoot from a sprint, leaving the ground entirely and hitting Bigfoot from the side in a full-body tackle. Both went down, with Dogman on top, jaws driving toward Bigfoot's neck. Bigfoot got a hand on the Dogman's throat in the first second of the tackle. One hand, grip closed, arm fully extended, holding the snapping jaws off its neck while the other fist drove into the animal's ribs. The impacts were audible. The Dogman made sounds with each hit, not roars, shorter and sharper, almost like yelps but deeper, the kind of sound that carries information about pain rather than aggression. But it did not release. Its claws were working on Bigfoot's shoulders and chest, adding to the wounds already there. The grizzly, apparently recognizing a common target, came back into the fight at 6:52. I watched what happened next with a specific quality of attention that I think anyone who has spent time in the field understands. The kind of watching you do when the situation has exceeded every category you came in with. You are simply recording without interpretation because interpretation requires a framework, and your framework has failed you. Two apex predators were attacking Bigfoot simultaneously. The grizzly hit from the left side, driving its shoulder into Bigfoot's flank, while the Dogman maintained its grip on the shoulders from above. Bigfoot was taking damage from two directions at once. The grizzly's claws raking the left side, the Dogman's claws at the shoulders, the grizzly's teeth probing for a hold on the right forearm. What Bigfoot did in response to this is the sequence I've replayed more than any other in the footage. The creature grabbed the grizzly's head with both hands, releasing the grip on the Dogman's throat to do it, and drove a knee upward into the grizzly's face simultaneously. The knee connected with the bear's nose. Blood sprayed from the bear's nostrils. The grizzly released the forearm and stumbled back. In the same motion, Bigfoot kicked backward with the right foot, catching the Dogman in the chest and driving it off its back. 3 seconds. Both opponents separated. Bigfoot stood in the center of the meadow, bleeding from wounds across its chest, abdomen, arms, and shoulders, and it was the only one still upright and still moving forward. The grizzly came back at 6:53. This was the charge that cost the bear the fight. The bear drove in from the right, jaws going for the right forearm, the same target it had been working on since the ground exchange. Bigfoot let the bite connect. I watched the creature absorb the bite, teeth sinking into muscle, and rather than pulling away, it used the bear's locked jaw to control the grizzly's head. Free hand came across in a short arc to the bear's nose, not the full hammer strike of earlier, a targeted blow with the heel of the palm directly to the broken cartilage. The grizzly's jaw went slack immediately. The bear backed away, shaking its head, blood running freely from both nostrils, and its movement had changed. The front right leg was not carrying weight evenly. I watched the grizzly take 3 steps and understood what had happened. At some point during the exchange, while I had been tracking the Dogman, Bigfoot had gotten a grip on the grizzly's front right leg and applied torque. The leg was compromised. The bear was not going to charge again. The Dogman came in for its second major attempt at 6:54. It was slower now. The kick to the chest had done damage, and the gait was uneven on the right side. But it lunged for Bigfoot's throat one more time, jaws open, coming in low. Bigfoot caught it by the throat with one hand, and by the hip with the other. The lift that followed was the single most physically remarkable thing I documented in those 14 minutes. 7 feet of the Dogman, whatever it was, however it was built, whatever its mass, lifted completely off the ground and held at full arm extension overhead. Bigfoot held it there for what I measured on the footage as 3 seconds. 3 seconds with that weight overhead, that extension, that load, then it came down. The impact when the Dogman hit the ground was audible from my position. The body bounced once, a small involuntary movement that bodies make when a large amount of force has transferred through them against a resistant surface. Then it went still. Bigfoot stood over the motionless form of the Dogman, bleeding from more wounds than I could count, chest heaving in the cold morning air, breath visible in the October frost. It looked at the grizzly, still standing, favoring the front right leg, no longer advancing. Then it looked back down at the Dogman. One harsh stomp. The right foot was brought down with deliberate force onto the Dogman's head, a sound I don't need to describe. At 6:58 a.m., Bigfoot turned and walked back into the tree line, slowly, still upright, still moving under its own power, but clearly injured and exhausted. The grizzly turned and limped toward the opposite tree line, leaving a blood trail in the frost-covered grass. The meadow was quiet. The Dogman was motionless in the grass approximately 30 yards from my position. I sat in my tree stand for another 30 minutes without climbing down. I went back 3 days later with 2 other hunters I trusted. The blood was still on the ground, both the dark reddish-brown from Bigfoot and the grayish-brown from the other one. The claw marks in the soil were still readable, deep gouges in the earth showing where the fight had taken place. The tufts of hair were still on the grass stems where the fight had moved them. I collected several samples of both types. We found massive amounts of blood, hair samples caught on broken branches, and impressions in the dirt that clearly showed where the battle had taken place. The ground was torn up over an area roughly 40 feet in diameter, but Dogman's body was gone. I filed a report with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks the next day, though I didn't mention Bigfoot or Dogman by name. I just reported witnessing a violent animal encounter in the area. The officials seemed skeptical, but took the report. I know what I filmed, I know what I watched, and I know that the creature that showed up at 6:51, the one Bigfoot put into the ground hard enough to bounce, is the reason I haven't released the full footage yet. I'll say this much. Dogman didn't go for the 800-pound grizzly, it went for Bigfoot. Somehow, it knew Bigfoot was the threat. The question is why?
Kevin had spent the better part of 4 years building a reputation as one of the more meticulous wildlife documentarians working the Pacific Northwest. At 38, he operated out of Portland, Oregon, with the kind of patience that most filmmakers his age had already given up on. For this particular project, Kevin deployed 12 motion-activated cameras across a 20-square-mile section of Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. All 12 were Reconyx models, angled to capture movement along game trails and natural feeding clearings. Camera 4 was the one that really mattered. Kevin had positioned it near a dense huckleberry patch in a remote valley, approximately 9 miles from the nearest Forest Service road. Getting there required a full day's hike with equipment on both legs of the trip. But that's when everything changed. High on a Douglas fir approximately 15 feet from camera number 4's mounting tree, there were fresh scratches in the bark, deep ones. They ran in parallel lines from roughly 9 feet off the ground up to about 12 feet, suggesting something had raked downward with significant force. Kevin photographed them and noted they were too high and too deep to be consistent with any black bear in the area. Black bears scratch trees as a form of communication. They rear up on their hind legs and mark at the upper limit of their reach. The tallest bear Kevin had documented in this section was a male he estimated at around 400 pounds, capable of reaching about 7 feet standing upright. These scratches started at 9 feet. Whatever made them was reaching above the height of the largest known bear in the study area. Kevin flagged it in his log and left. On June 3, 2014, Kevin made his final equipment check at camera number 4 before leaving the area. He spent several hours adjusting the angle and recalibrating the motion sensors. He noted in his field log that the berries were ripening faster than expected. He noted that peak bear activity was probably 2 to 3 weeks out. He also noted something that didn't belong. The timestamp reads 3:47 p.m., August 28, 2014. The footage opens on a scene so ordinary it barely warrants description. A large male black bear enters the frame from the left, moving towards the huckleberry patch with the unhurried, methodical gait of an animal completely at ease in its environment. Based on comparison to the alder saplings at the right edge of the frame, whose heights Kevin had documented during setup, the bear weighs approximately 350 pounds. It's in peak late summer condition, dense and heavy-shouldered, moving with the kind of settled confidence that comes from weeks of undisturbed feeding at the same location. It drops its head and begins stripping berries. The bear feeds without interruption for 23 seconds. At the 0:23 mark, something shifts. Not in the clearing, in the bear. Its head comes up in a single frame, ears rigid, body locked. It backs 2 steps away from the berry patch. The camera's built-in microphone picks up a low huffing sound, the warning vocalization that black bears produce when they detect something large enough to pose a genuine threat. Not deer, not smaller predators, something the bear's instincts have registered as dangerous before its eyes have found it. The bear rises onto its hind legs at 0:28, reaching approximately 6 feet tall, and scans the tree line at the clearing's far edge. It holds that position for 3 full seconds. At 0:31, Bigfoot steps out of the forest. It doesn't ease into the clearing. It doesn't pause at the tree line. It walks into the open at full height and stops. Later analysis placed the creature at approximately 8.5 feet tall, using the alder saplings and the bear's estimated size as reference points. Weight estimates based on proportion and build ranged from 700 to 800 pounds. The hair covering its body is dark brown, dense, visibly matted in the way hair gets when it's exposed to forest conditions over long periods. Not groomed, not maintained, just grown. There is a lighter coloring across the chest and upper abdomen. The arms are long enough that the hands hang past the knees when relaxed. Each finger is individually visible in the 1080p resolution. The shoulders are wide enough that the frame barely contains them. The face is the part that stopped researchers. A flat nose, wide nostrils, a heavy brow ridge that throws the eyes into shadow. The expression, and every researcher who viewed this footage used that word without being asked to, is not neutral. Lips slightly parted, the jaw set. The eyes on the bear have a quality that a forensic behavioral analyst described in his written assessment as resolved. Not threatening, not displaying, already past that stage. Bigfoot has already decided what will happen. The bear has not run. This detail matters. A 350-pound adult male black bear is not prey. It is one of the apex predators of the Pacific Northwest, capable of driving off mountain lions and holding territory against anything in the regional ecosystem. When black bears encounter threats, they assess the situation. This one assesses for 4 full seconds, while Bigfoot stands motionless at the clearing's edge. And then the bear does something that no wildlife biologist watching this footage expected. It holds its ground. It stays on its hind legs. It huffs again, louder this time, audible on the recording even over the ambient forest noise. Bigfoot doesn't respond. It doesn't posture. It doesn't vocalize. It stands completely still and watches the bear with the same expression it had when it entered the clearing. The stillness lasts 9 seconds. 9 seconds of a 350-pound bear and an 800-pound unknown creature locked in a standoff in a forest clearing that nobody was supposed to be watching. And then Bigfoot takes the first step forward. The approach is not a charge. Not yet. Bigfoot moves across the clearing in a slow, deliberate walk that covers ground without urgency. The kind of movement that communicates something more unsettling than speed. Speed would mean adrenaline. Speed would mean reactivity. This is neither. This is something walking toward a confrontation that it considers already settled. At 0:41, when Bigfoot has closed the distance to approximately 15 feet, the bear drops back to all fours. Standard territorial behavior, dropping to all fours before a charge or a retreat, loading the hindquarters for explosive movement in either direction. The bear's head is low, ears back. It huffs 3 times in rapid succession. Bigfoot stops walking at 12 feet. It stands and looks at the bear. What follows is 14 seconds of footage that forensic behavioral analysts have returned to repeatedly because it doesn't fit any predator-prey interaction template in the database. Bigfoot is not circling. It is not fainting. It is standing 12 feet from a 350-pound bear that is visibly preparing to either charge or flee, and it is simply waiting. The bear's head swings left and right, looking for an exit route, evaluating angles. Bigfoot's head doesn't move. Its eyes track the bear's movement without the head following. The eyes move within the skull, while the face stays forward. The behavior of an animal watching something it expects to be in a specific place when the time comes. At 0:55, the bear makes its decision. It launches forward, a black bear charge, low and fast, covering ground with the explosive acceleration that makes these animals genuinely dangerous. A charging 350-pound black bear hits with enough force to knock a grown person 20 feet. It covers the 12 feet between them in under a second. Bigfoot sidesteps, not backward, not a retreat. A single lateral step to the right that takes it outside the bear's charge line. And as the bear passes, Bigfoot's left hand comes down across the back of the bear's neck. Not a full strike, an open palm push that redirects the bear's momentum and sends it stumbling past, losing its footing on the turn and going down on one knee before scrambling back upright. The bear spins to face Bigfoot again, its breathing hard, audible on the recording. The charge cost it something. Bigfoot is in the same place it was before the step, facing the bear, completely unruffled. The footage shows Bigfoot's posture at this moment with unusual clarity, still upright, arms loose at its sides, head level. It hasn't widened its stance. It hasn't raised its hands. It didn't need to. A 350-pound black bear charged it at full speed, and Bigfoot took one step to the side and redirected it with an open palm. The bear is already bleeding and catching its breath. Bigfoot looks like it hasn't moved at all. For 3 seconds, neither animal moves. The bear at one side of the clearing, Bigfoot at the center, the huckleberry patch behind it, untouched. Then the bear drops lower, shifts its weight to its hindquarters, and comes again. The bear charges again at 104, lower this time, faster, angling from the right. Bigfoot doesn't sidestep. It takes one step forward into the charge, directly into the bear's path, and catches the animal by the shoulder with one hand, absorbing the impact without moving, stopping 350 pounds of full-speed black bear with a single outstretched arm. The bear's momentum simply ceases. Its legs scramble against the ground and find no purchase. For 2 full seconds, the recording shows Bigfoot holding a charging black bear at arm's length, while the animal's hind legs work uselessly against the earth. The bear doesn't stop trying. That's the part the footage makes clear. While it's suspended at arm's length, feet off the ground, all forward momentum gone, it twists its neck and bites down on Bigfoot's extended forearm. The bite is visible on the recording. The bear locks its jaws and wrenches sideways, the way bears break limbs and uproot stumps. Bigfoot's arm does not move. The grip on the shoulder does not release. For a full second, a 350-pound black bear is biting down with everything it has on an arm that does not react. Then Bigfoot releases it. The bear stumbles back, shaking its head. It is bleeding now, somewhere around the left ear, a dark line visible in the footage. It didn't get that from Bigfoot's hand. It got it from the impact, from hitting something that simply didn't give. The clearing is quiet for 6 seconds. At 112, something in the bear's posture changes. The aggression has not left. The ears are still back, the head still low, but there is a new quality in its movement, something tighter and less committed. The bear circles left, staying at roughly 10 feet, watching Bigfoot's hands. Bigfoot pivots to track it, still standing straight, still unhurried. The bear circles right. Bigfoot pivots again. This continues for 47 seconds. What the footage shows for the next 47 seconds is one of the most analytically unusual sequences in the entire recording. The bear circles at a consistent radius, probing. It accelerates, then slows. It feints left, recovers, feints right. Each movement is met with nothing more than a pivot from Bigfoot, keeping its front oriented toward the bear, hands loose at its sides. 3 times during the circle, the bear makes short, partial lunges, not full charges, to test responses. Each time, Bigfoot moves into the lunge rather than back from it, one hand coming forward as a block or redirect. The contact brief and controlled. After the 3rd lunge, the bear retreats to 15 feet and stops circling. There is a 4th exchange that researchers note separately. At approximately 1:43, the bear stops circling and stands still 10 feet away, facing Bigfoot directly. It holds that position for 4 seconds, the longest it has been completely motionless since Bigfoot entered the clearing. Then it rises onto its hind legs again, the same posture as 028, the same attempt to make itself large, the same forepaws up. It is taller than most predators it has encountered in this forest. It is 6 feet tall and 350 pounds, out of options, and trying the thing that has worked on everything else. Bigfoot watches it from 10 feet away without changing its expression. The bear holds the posture for 3 seconds. Then it drops back to all fours, backs 2 steps, and makes the low, sustained moan that comes next. At 1:59, the bear does something that wildlife biologists reviewing this footage noted as genuinely unusual. It vocalizes, not a huff, but a longer, lower sound. the kind of sustained moan that black bears produce in situations of extreme stress. It is not a combat sound. It is closer to what researchers describe as a distress call, the kind of sound bears make when they are injured or cornered. The bear is neither injured enough to justify that vocalization, nor cornered in any physical sense. The clearing has open exits in 3 directions. The bear is making that sound because of what it is standing 15 feet from. Bigfoot doesn't react to the sound. It doesn't move toward the bear. It doesn't move away. It stands at the center of the clearing with the same quality of settled stillness it has maintained since it stopped walking at 0:41. And it watches the bear produce a sound that, in over 4 years of footage, Kevin had never once recorded a black bear making in an open clearing with multiple escape routes available. At 2:14, the bear tries to leave. It turns away from Bigfoot and moves toward the tree line at the clearing's south edge, low and fast, not quite running. The exit is 30 feet away. Open ground, no obstacles. 3 seconds at the bear's current speed, and it reaches cover. And for 3 seconds that researchers have flagged in every analysis of this footage, Bigfoot simply watches it go. The bear covers 8 feet before Bigfoot moves. Then it moves. At 2:17, Bigfoot covers the distance to the retreating bear in 4 strides, not at full speed, deliberately. The bear hears it coming and tries to accelerate toward the tree line, and Bigfoot cuts left, angles ahead of the bear's path, and stops directly between the bear and the forest exit. The bear pulls up short. It is now 8 feet from Bigfoot and approximately 25 feet from the nearest tree line. It turns and looks for another exit. Bigfoot watches it look. When the bear begins moving toward the east edge of the clearing, Bigfoot moves first, cutting that angle too, positioning again between the bear and the trees. This happens 4 times in 38 seconds. Each time, the pattern is the same. The bear picks an angle toward the tree line, south edge, east edge, a gap between 2 large firs at the northwest corner, and begins moving. Each time, Bigfoot is already there before the bear arrives. Not running, not scrambling. Moving at a pace that shouldn't be fast enough to cut off a bear at full acceleration, but arriving first regardless. On the 3rd attempt, the bear gets within 6 feet of the tree line before Bigfoot steps into the gap. On the 4th attempt, it doesn't get that far. By the 5th, the bear doesn't pick a direction at all. It slows to a stop at the center of the clearing and stands there. By 2:55, the bear has stopped trying to reach the tree line. It is standing at the center of the clearing, where Bigfoot has herded it, turning in slow circles. Its breathing is audible on the recording. It is not badly injured. The cut near its ear is minor, and the stumbles from the earlier exchanges left nothing visible. But it has been outmaneuvered 4 times in under a minute by something that never appeared to hurry, and it has run out of angles. Bigfoot has been guiding the bear toward the center of the clearing with the same calm deliberateness it has shown since it entered the frame. Not pursuing, not attacking. Positioning. The bear stands in the open at the center of the clearing, and Bigfoot stands between it and every exit, and for 22 seconds, nothing moves at all. The bear is 9 feet from Bigfoot. Bigfoot is standing with its arms at its sides. The bear's ears are flat, its head low, its weight settled over its hindquarters. It is ready to charge or ready to run. Both options are available in its body, loaded and waiting for the decision. What is not available, and what the bear seems to be processing for the first time in the footage, is a path that doesn't go through the thing standing in front of it. At 3:14, the bear's head moves, not toward Bigfoot, sideways, scanning the tree line to the east one more time. The gap between the 2 large firs at the northwest corner, the south edge, back to Bigfoot. The scan takes 4 seconds and finds nothing new. Bigfoot blocked all of those angles already and is standing between the bear and every one of them. The bear's head comes back to the center, to Bigfoot. 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Then the bear charges. At 3:17, it lowers its head and goes straight at Bigfoot. Not for the tree line, not angled, just directly forward at full speed with everything it has left. Bigfoot takes 1 step back to absorb the incoming force and catches the bear by both shoulders as it arrives. The impact is audible on the recording, the heaviest sound in the entire 5-minute clip, louder than the earlier exchanges. A collision between 350 pounds of forward momentum and something that doesn't move. The bear's legs keep churning for 2 full seconds, going nowhere, while Bigfoot holds it at full extension, both hands locked on the animal's shoulders, looking down at it. The bear bites again. Same thing it tried at 1:04, jaws locking on Bigfoot's right forearm, full force, twisting. The bite holds for 2 seconds. The arm doesn't move. Bigfoot looks down at it, the way you might look at something pulling on your sleeve. Then Bigfoot lifts the bear off the ground and holds it there, all 4 paws off the earth, dangling, for a full 3 seconds. The camera is close enough that individual muscles are visible moving under the hair of Bigfoot's forearms as it holds the weight. The bear makes no sound. It has gone from the loudest and most aggressive animal in this forest to completely silent in under 4 minutes. Bigfoot carries it to the center of the clearing. At 3:34, it sets the bear down on its feet, releases it, steps back. The bear lands on all 4s. It takes 1 stumbling step sideways to regain its balance, then goes still. It does not immediately try to run. It does not charge. Its head is up, breathing loud enough to pick up on the recording, the cut near its ear still visible. It is looking at Bigfoot with the same fixed attention it has had since 0:31, but there is nothing in that attention now that resembles the aggression from the first 2 charges. The behavioral analyst who reviewed the footage described the bear's posture at 3:34 as orientation without intent. The body pointed toward the threat. No commitment behind it. Bigfoot stands 2 feet away and looks back at it for 4 seconds. Then it turns and walks to the berry patch. The bear does not run. It stands where Bigfoot placed it, breathing hard, head low. It doesn't attempt another exit. It doesn't charge. Whatever the last 4 minutes have communicated, the bear has received the message. It stands in the open at the center of the clearing, and it waits. And Bigfoot walks back to the huckleberry patch and begins feeding. For the next 97 seconds, from 3:34 to 5:11, the camera records Bigfoot feeding and the bear standing motionless in the center of the clearing, watching it. Bigfoot strips berries methodically, covering the patch in the same systematic route the bear had been using before the standoff began. It moves without hurry. Occasionally, it glances at the bear, not with threat, not with monitoring attention, with the glance of something checking on something it has put somewhere. At 4:02, the bear takes 1 step toward the tree line, just 1. It stops. Bigfoot doesn't look up from the berry patch. It keeps feeding. The bear holds its position for 11 seconds, then steps back to where it was. At 4:19, the bear takes 2 steps in a different direction, toward the north edge of the clearing. It stops again. Bigfoot still doesn't look up. The bear watches Bigfoot's back for 8 seconds, assessing whether the inattention is real or a trap. Then it steps back. It doesn't try again after that. The bear does not leave. It stands in the open and watches a creature it cannot fight, feeding on berries it had arrived to claim for itself, and does not move. At 5:04, Bigfoot finishes the eastern edge of the patch. It pauses. It looks at the bear for the first time, with the same expression it entered the clearing with, that resolved, settled quality that researchers kept returning to when describing the face at 0:31. What happens next is what the footage is named for. It is the last 7 seconds of the recording. It is the darkest thing ever documented on a wildlife camera in the Pacific Northwest. And it is the reason Kevin watched this clip 6 times in a row before he took his pack off. At 5:05, Bigfoot moves toward the bear, not walking this time, not the deliberate, calculated approach from the beginning. 3 fast strides that close the remaining distance in under 2 seconds. The bear has been watching Bigfoot feed for 97 seconds. It has seen Bigfoot's back. It has tested the gaps twice and found nothing. When Bigfoot turns and moves, the bear has less than 2 seconds to process the change before the distance is gone. The bear doesn't run. It hasn't had a plan that worked yet, and it has nowhere left to go. And it has been standing in the open for 97 seconds, absorbing whatever the last 4 minutes have meant to its instincts. It does the only thing left. It rises on its hind legs, full height, the same defensive posture it tried at the very beginning when Bigfoot first emerged from the tree line, 6 feet tall, 4 paws raised, making itself as large as it can be. Bigfoot grabs it by the throat with one hand, The grip is immediate and complete, one hand closing around the bear's neck while it is still rising, stopping the movement entirely. Bigfoot's arm is fully extended. The bear is off the ground with its hind legs, scrambling in the air. It lasted this long. It survived the charges, survived being held at arm's length, survived being lifted and set back down, survived 97 seconds of standing in the open while the thing that herded it there ate berries. It is still fighting. It rakes Bigfoot's forearm with both sets of claws, audible on the recording. 4 rapid impacts that tear through the hair and leave marks visible in the frame. And Bigfoot does not release the grip. The arm doesn't bend. It doesn't shift. The individual muscles visible beneath the hair of that extended forearm don't change. Holding 350 pounds at arm's length with one hand, with a bear actively tearing at the skin, is something no known primate and no known predator in the Pacific Northwest can do. Bigfoot does it for 3 seconds without visible effort. At 5:08, Bigfoot drives the bear into the ground face first, with enough force to send a visible plume of dust and debris up into the frame. The sound it makes is the loudest thing on the recording by a significant margin. The bear does not get up. What follows in the final seconds of footage is the detail that caused multiple researchers to turn off the recording before it finished. Bigfoot drops to one knee over the bear. The feeding that follows is immediate and methodical, and it does not stop before the recording ends. The creature that spent 4 minutes herding this bear to the center of a clearing, that held it off the ground with one hand and set it back down, and then fed peacefully for 97 seconds before deciding the time had arrived. The total footage was 5 minutes and 11 seconds. Kevin retrieved camera number 4's memory card on September 4th, 2014, during a routine maintenance sweep. He watched the footage 6 times, standing in the forest. His field notes from that afternoon are 4 lines long. He wrote that he didn't know how to categorize what he had filmed, and that he needed to hike to camera number 4's position before leaving. He did. The bear's carcass was still partially at the site, scavenged in the week since its death, but identifiable by size and positioned where the footage showed it had ended up. Kevin returned to that location a year later. He found new scratch marks on the same Douglas fir, higher than before, reaching 14 feet, requiring an extension that exceeded even the creature's documented height. Made exactly 1 year after the attack, at the same tree, in the same pattern. Bigfoot was still alive. If you liked this video, check out this one.
I had been working the northern range of Yellowstone for most of that fall, scouting elk ahead of the rut. I had positioned a Reconyx trail camera on a tree line overlooking a small meadow approximately 12 miles from the nearest road. I had chosen this location because the meadow was known for elk activity in the early fall, when bison moved through the northern range ahead of the rut. The elevation and the tree coverage were right. What I hadn't accounted for was that the meadow also sat at the edge of the bison grazing range from the Lamar Valley herd. Large bull bison in late January move unpredictably. They had grazed through that meadow before and would again. My camera was positioned to catch that kind of movement regardless of which large animal produced it. On January 22, 2026, at 4:17 p.m., the camera triggered and I was still there, tucked into the tree line about 60 yards east, glassing for elk. I heard the bison before I saw it. A large bison entered the clearing from the east and began grazing. Based on later analysis comparing the animal's dimensions against known vegetation reference points in the frame, the bison weighed approximately 2,000 pounds. At 4:19 p.m., Bigfoot entered the frame from the opposite side of the meadow. I did not move. I did not breathe loudly. I stayed exactly where I was and watched. I've looked at a lot of footage in this field, and what strikes me first about the entry is its pace. Bigfoot doesn't come out of the tree line fast. It doesn't rush. It walks into the clearing at full height with the kind of deliberate, unhurried stride that communicates something more specific than aggression. It communicates that the creature already knows what is going to happen and is not in a hurry because it doesn't need to be. The creature was approximately 8.7 feet tall. Weight estimates from the analysis, using the bison's verified mass as a scaling reference, put Bigfoot somewhere between 750 and 800 pounds. The hair covering the body was dark brown and dense, and the underlying muscle structure was clearly visible in the afternoon light as the creature moved. The shoulders were massive, broader than any human's, with deltoid muscles that bulged visibly beneath the hair with each step. The arms hung at its sides, but even relaxed, the forearms were thicker than most men's thighs. The face was oriented directly at the bison from the moment it cleared the tree line. The bison's response was immediate and exactly what any wildlife biologist would predict. The animal's head came up, nostrils working the air, the full attention of a 2,000-pound prey assessment machine suddenly redirected toward the figure, walking across the meadow. The bison pawed the ground with one front hoof, classic bison threat behavior, the preliminary gesture before a charge decision is made. It's a behavior bison use when they detect a threat and are assessing whether to stand or engage. They don't do it for small threats. They do it for things that have triggered the part of their threat assessment system reserved for animals that could actually hurt them. Bigfoot made a loud cry. The sound carried across the meadow, a deep, resonant roar that the camera's audio registered clearly. It lasted approximately 4 seconds. I played it back several times with the volume up, and what stays with me is not the volume, but the register. This was not a threat display in the way a bear's vocalization is, reactive, explosive, elevated by adrenaline. This was controlled, sustained, produced at a consistent volume for the full 4 seconds, without escalation or variation at the end. The sound of something that was not surprised by its own anger. As Bigfoot screamed, I could see the muscles in its neck and chest expand. The creature's jaw opened wide, revealing teeth that were larger and more pronounced than any human's. Not fangs, but the heavy, grinding teeth of something built to process tough material. The sound seemed to come from deep in its chest cavity, resonating through a body structure designed to produce that kind of volume. Bigfoot continued walking directly toward the bison. The bison pawed the ground a second time, then a third. Each time, the interval between the paws shortened, the behavioral escalation pattern of a bison working toward a charge decision. I could see the animal's muscles tensing, the massive hindquarters bunching, as it prepared to convert its weight into momentum. At some threshold in that meadow, the bison made the calculation. It lowered its head, drove its back legs into the earth, and charged. 40 feet of open ground, a 2,000-pound animal at 25 miles per hour. Horns lowered and targeted at Bigfoot's midsection. Bigfoot waited. This is the moment I keep returning to. Not because of what Bigfoot did, I'll describe that in a moment, but because of what it didn't do. It didn't step back. It didn't sidestep early, while it still had distance to work with and time to get clear. It stood in the path of a 2,000-pound bison charge and waited until the horns were within 3 feet of its body before it moved. What I kept thinking, running the analysis on that moment, was about the timing. 3 feet at 25 miles per hour gives you roughly 0.08 of a second before contact. That's not reaction time. Human reaction time to a visual stimulus runs about a quarter second, meaning a human would have been hit before the nervous system could complete a response signal to the muscles. What Bigfoot did at 4:20 p.m. was not a reaction. It was a timed movement, a decision made well in advance, held through what every instinct would be. Screaming was already too late, and executed at a precision that 0.08 of a second does not allow for improvisation. Bigfoot pivoted sideways and got both hands on the bison's skull between the horns. The grip was specific, not a grab at the horns, not a deflection of the animal's head. Fingers spread wide, palms flat against the skull, the kind of controlled surface contact that maximizes the ability to redirect momentum rather than absorb it. I could see Bigfoot's fingers, each one thick as a man's wrist, dig into the coarse hair around the bison's skull. The creature's hands were enormous, easily spanning the width of the bison's head between the horns. Bigfoot pushed upward and sideways with explosive force as the bison's charge carried it through the pivot point. The bison's momentum did most of the work, but the direction that momentum traveled was Bigfoot's choice. The bison stumbled past. Its front legs buckled momentarily from the torque applied to its neck during the redirect. I could see the animal's hooves dig furrows in the soft meadow soil as it fought to maintain balance. The animal recovered quickly. Bison are extraordinarily resilient, and a stumble is not a fall. But it had covered 40 feet of meadow at full speed and arrived at its target and found nothing where the target used to be. It wheeled to face Bigfoot again, and I could see foam beginning to form around its mouth from the exertion. Bigfoot was already moving toward it. The two animals met near the center of the meadow. The bison tried a short, jabbing lunge, head low, horns forward, not a full charge, but a probe. Bigfoot stepped backward one step, let the horns pass, then closed the distance immediately. That exchange took less than 2 seconds. What it told me, watching from the tree line, was that Bigfoot had no interest in creating space between them. It kept closing. Every time a gap opened, Bigfoot filled it. It was choosing to fight within reach of a 2,000-pound animal's horns, and it was doing so deliberately. What followed in the next 3 minutes was the most sustained, documented physical confrontation between Bigfoot and another large animal in any footage I've analyzed. I'm going to describe it in sequence because the sequence matters, not just for understanding what happened, but for understanding what the behavioral pattern reveals about how Bigfoot fights. At 4:21 p.m., Bigfoot attacked for the first time. Not a charge, a lunge forward and a single downward strike with the right fist that connected across the top of the bison's skull between the horns. Hammer fist mechanics. For anyone familiar with primate striking behavior, the fist comes down at the end of a fully extended arm, using the body's falling weight to amplify the force delivered at impact. It is the most powerful single-point strike a large primate can produce. The sound of the impact was audible on my footage even at 60 yards, a wet, meaty thud that carried across the meadow. The bison's head jerked downward from the impact, and I could see the animal's eyes roll momentarily from the concussive force. The animal staggered sideways, its massive legs working to keep it upright. Bigfoot grabbed the bison's left horn with both hands before it could recover and pulled sideways and backward, using the horn as a lever to work against the bison's mass. The bison weighs nearly 3 times what Bigfoot weighs, but leverage operates on geometry, not on weight differential. I watched Bigfoot's back muscles strain as it applied the leverage, the creature's entire torso twisting to generate maximum torque. Bigfoot's grip on the horn, combined with a correctly angled pull, produced enough torque to lift the bison's front end approximately 2 feet off the ground before the animal's mass and strength overcame the leverage angle and it twisted free. The horn ripped out of Bigfoot's grip with a sound like tearing leather. The bison wheeled again, and I could see blood beginning to seep from where Bigfoot's grip had torn the skin around the horn base. At 4:22 p.m., the bison connected. The bison charged a second time, and this time Bigfoot didn't redirect cleanly. The horns caught Bigfoot across the chest and abdomen. The force of a 2,000-pound animal at full speed is not a force any analysis can fully convey in text. It lifted Bigfoot completely off the ground and drove it backward 8 feet before the creature's back slammed into a tree trunk. I watched the impact frame by frame. The tree visibly flexed on contact, bark exploding outward from the point of impact. Bigfoot's roar in the audio at that moment was different from the controlled 4-second vocalization at the entry. Shorter, sharper, the compressed sound of something absorbing more force than it expected. I could see 2 distinct puncture wounds in Bigfoot's chest where the bison's horns had penetrated. Dark blood began to mat the hair around the wounds, spreading outward in wet patches. The creature's breathing changed. I could see its chest heaving more rapidly, the rhythm disrupted by pain. Bigfoot slumped against the tree. The bison pressed forward, horns aimed at Bigfoot's torso. This was the killing moment, the follow-through that a bison uses to finish what the charge began. The bison's eyes were wide with rage, foam streaming from its mouth, its massive head lowered for the final thrust. Bigfoot twisted sideways at the last possible moment. The horns hit the tree trunk instead of the body, burying slightly in the bark with a sound like an axe biting wood. The bison pulled back to free them, and I could see wood chips and bark fragments scattered around the impact point. That delay was the opening Bigfoot needed. The creature pushed off the tree and swung a backhand strike across the side of the bison's face. The blow landed with tremendous force. I could see the bison's entire head snap sideways from the impact. Blood sprayed from the animal's mouth in a wide arc, and I counted at least 3 broken teeth that flew from the impact point. The bison's lips split open, creating a gash that immediately began streaming blood down its jaw. The bison bellowed in pain and rage, the sound echoing across the meadow. Both animals were now injured. Both were breathing hard. At 4:23 p.m., they circled each other at the center of the meadow. Bigfoot bleeding from 2 puncture wounds in its chest where the horns had penetrated, the bison's left eye swelling shut and blood dripping from the gash above its horn and the split in its lip. What I remember from standing at the tree line during this stretch is the sound of the bison's breathing. It had changed from what it was at the start, faster now, audible at 60 yards, with a wet quality on the exhale that wasn't there before the fight began. Each breath produced a slight wheeze, suggesting internal damage from Bigfoot's initial strike. Whatever the cure, first exchange had done to the animal's chest had left something inside. The bison was still standing. It was still capable. But it was working harder to stay that way than it had been 4 minutes ago. Bigfoot was compensating too. The right arm was carrying the horn wounds, and on the footage, not obvious at 60 yards but clear frame by frame, the shoulder mechanics on the right side had shifted. The creature favored its left side now, keeping the right arm closer to its body to protect the puncture wounds. The left arm was doing more of the guarding work. Neither of them was where they started. Both of them were still in it. What came next was the bison's third charge, and this time, Bigfoot used the animal's own momentum in a way I had not seen in any prior documented confrontation. At the moment of the charge, Bigfoot sidestepped. As the bison passed, the creature grabbed its tail with both hands and planted its feet and pulled backward. What Bigfoot was doing, what I recognized immediately from the physics of the movement, was using the bison's own forward momentum as a counterforce. The bison was trying to convert its mass into speed and drive it into Bigfoot. Bigfoot grabbed the trailing end of that mass and redirected all of that energy sideways. I could see Bigfoot's leg muscles strain as it planted its feet and pulled. The creature's calves bulged beneath the hair, and its feet actually dug trenches in the soft meadow soil from the force it was applying. The bison's hindquarters yanked hard to the right. The rear leg slipped on the torn-up ground, and I watched the animal's massive body lose all coordination as its front end continued forward while its back end was yanked sideways. 2,000 pounds crashed sideways onto the meadow floor with an impact that I felt through the ground even at 60 yards. Bigfoot was on top of it before the dust cleared. The footage at 4:23 p.m. after the bison went down is the section I find most analytically significant and the most difficult to describe without understating what it shows. Bigfoot threw itself onto the downed bison's flank and wrapped both arms around the animal's barrel chest from behind. Then it squeezed. I ran the force estimation from the compression visible in the footage and the bison's known ribcage dimensions, and what the analysis returned was consistent with the grip strength of an animal in the 750 to 800 pound range applying maximum sustained force, not a burst compression, not a single squeeze, but sustained constricting pressure aimed at preventing full lung expansion. I could see Bigfoot's arms actually compress the bison's ribcage. The creature's biceps and forearms bulged with the effort, and the bison's breathing became immediately labored. The animal's eyes bulged as it struggled to draw air into compressed lungs. This is a kill technique. It is used by large constrictors, by large felines against prey too big to kill immediately, with a single bite, and by animals that have learned that sustained pressure on the respiratory system will eventually accomplish what a single strike cannot. The bison did the thing bison do when they cannot shake a threat. It used its weight. The animal rolled, 2,000 pounds coming down on top of Bigfoot while Bigfoot's back was on the ground. Bigfoot's grip held. The audio at this point in the footage is the roar going muffled and strained, the sound of Bigfoot being compressed by the bison's weight while still maintaining its hold on the animal's chest. I played this section multiple times trying to find the frame where the grip broke. It didn't break. Even pinned under 2,000 pounds, the creature kept the constricting hold. I could see Bigfoot's face in profile during this sequence, jaw clenched, eyes focused, the expression of something enduring tremendous pressure but refusing to let go. The bison rolled again, and Bigfoot scrambled free, winded. The creature's chest was now covered in dirt and grass stains from being ground into the meadow floor. The bison regained its feet slowly. The sustained chest compression had done damage even through the roll, and the animal's breathing was now visibly labored, each inhale shorter and shallower than before. I could see the bison's flanks heaving with the effort of drawing air. Both of them stood there for a moment on opposite sides of the ground the roll had torn up. I watched this from the tree line, and what I remember is the particular stillness of it. Two massive animals, both damaged, both on their feet, both reading the space between them. The bison's head was lower than at the start, not in a threat posture, just lower, the neck muscles working harder to carry the weight. Blood continued to drip from its mouth and the gash above its horn, creating dark spots in the torn meadow grass. Bigfoot's chest rose and fell visibly, and I could see the creature's wounds had reopened from the rolling struggle, fresh blood seeping through the matted hair. Then Bigfoot took one step forward. The bison didn't charge. A bison that won't charge when something steps toward it has already made a decision its body reached before its instincts caught up. But the animal wasn't finished. It lowered its head and made one last desperate lunge. Not a full charge, but a final attempt to use its horns. Bigfoot caught the bison's head again, this time from the side, and drove a knee upward into the animal's jaw. The impact was devastating. I could hear the crack of bone even at my distance. The knee connected with the bison's lower jaw with enough force to snap the animal's head back violently. Blood poured from its mouth and nose in streams, and I could see that several more teeth had been broken or knocked loose entirely. The bison's jaw hung at an odd angle, clearly fractured. The bison staggered backward, shaking its massive head, trying to clear the stunning blow. Blood sprayed in arcs with each shake, painting the grass around it red. Bigfoot pressed forward relentlessly. The creature grabbed the bison by both ears and yanked the animal's head down while driving its own knee upward again. This time, the knee connected with the bison's forehead with a sickening crack that echoed across the meadow. I could see the impact point, a depression in the bison's skull where the bone had actually been fractured inward. The bison's legs wobbled, but it stayed upright through sheer mass and stubbornness. At 4:24 p.m., Bigfoot changed tactics entirely. This is the behavioral shift that I kept returning to when I wrote up the analysis, because the decision to stop grappling and start striking is not something an animal makes automatically. Grappling was what Bigfoot had been doing. The redirect, the horn grab, the tail pull, the chest constriction, all of it was contact fighting, close-range control work, trying to use the bison's mass against it. That approach had worked partially and failed partially. The bison had survived it. The bison was still standing. At 4:24 p.m., Bigfoot assessed what it was dealing with and switched. What followed was a striking combination that I have only seen one behavioral classification for in the predator literature: targeted percussion. Bigfoot moved to the bison's face and began hitting it. Left fist to the jaw, right fist to the temple, left again to the snout. Each blow landed with the specific force of an animal that understood where on the bison's skull the structural vulnerability points were. Not random strikes, not fury, but a methodical sequence targeting the areas where concussive force does the most neurological damage relative to the size of the blow: jaw, temple, snout. The same three locations repeated. I could see the effects of each strike. The first left hook to the jaw created another fracture line. I watched the bison's jaw shift further out of alignment. The right cross to the temple caused the bison's left eye to swell completely shut, and the animal's coordination visibly deteriorated. The second left to the snout broke the nasal bone with an audible crack, and blood began streaming from both nostrils. The bison's head rocked with each impact. The animal's movements went sluggish and uncoordinated. Its legs began to spread wider for balance as its equilibrium failed. Bigfoot grabbed the bison's head with both hands and delivered a devastating headbutt directly to the animal's skull. The impact echoed across the meadow like a gunshot. I could see both skulls compress at the point of contact, Bigfoot's forehead meeting the bison's with tremendous force. The bison's eyes rolled back, showing only white, and it swayed on its feet like a drunk. Bigfoot stepped back and delivered a massive uppercut to the bison's chin, lifting the animal's head and snapping its neck backward with a wet, popping sound. The bison tried to charge one more time, but its legs were unsteady. The animal stumbled mid-charge, its coordination completely gone, giving Bigfoot the opening it needed. The creature stepped to the side, grabbed the bison's head with both hands, one on each horn, and twisted with explosive rotational force. The bison's neck couldn't withstand the torque. Vertebrae cracked with sounds like breaking branches. Not one crack, but a series of them, as multiple vertebrae failed in sequence. The animal's massive body went rigid, then collapsed, legs folding beneath it. The bison was still alive but paralyzed, eyes still moving but unable to control anything below the neck. I could see its chest still rising and falling, but the breathing was shallow and irregular. Bigfoot stood over the dying animal, chest heaving, covered in blood, both its own and the bison's. The creature's hair was matted with gore, and I could see scratches and cuts across its arms and torso from the prolonged combat. The creature vocalized again, a long, deep roar that carried across the meadow and seemed to announce its victory to the entire wilderness. Then Bigfoot knelt beside the bison's head and delivered one final blow, a double-fisted overhead strike directly onto the animal's skull. The impact was final and absolute. I watched the bison's skull compress and crack under the force. Brain matter and blood sprayed outward from the impact point. The bison's eyes went blank, and the shallow breathing stopped, dead. At 4:26 p.m., the fight was over. Bigfoot had killed a fully grown bull bison through sustained combat lasting nearly 7 minutes. And yes, I have it all on film. I'm watching the clip from the beginning, and the trail looks empty. Clear sky through the canopy, maybe 60 degrees. The kind of October morning that makes you feel like you own the forest. My footsteps are steady. My breathing is calm. The GoPro captures everything with the crisp indifference of a machine that doesn't feel fear. And right there in the frame behind me, in the 10th minute, 43 seconds, about 40 yards away, something is standing completely still in the tree line. I didn't see it when I was walking. I see it now. Tall, dark, built like something that has never once been afraid of anything alive. Bigfoot had already been there for who knows how long, watching me move down that trail like it. Was studying how I walked. The shape of it is wrong in a way that's hard to explain without sounding like you've lost your mind. It wasn't the silhouette of a bear. It wasn't the broken canopy playing tricks on shadows. Sasquatch was upright, composed, and deliberately positioned just far enough inside the tree line to be invisible, unless you knew exactly what to look for. I've gone back to that frame dozens of times now, zooming in until the image breaks apart into pixels. And every time I come back to the same conclusion. Whatever was standing there, it had chosen that spot on purpose. There was nothing accidental about its position. The angle, the cover, the stillness, that takes thought. Back on the trail in real time, I had no idea. The footage shows me walking at a comfortable pace, occasionally glancing at the ground to watch my footing, pausing once to check my phone for a signal that wasn't there. Standard stuff, but the audio on the GoPro is better than I remembered. And when I crank the volume and listen closely, I can already hear it. Faint but rhythmic low-frequency clicks coming from somewhere in the trees to my left. It wasn't birds nor insects. It was something deliberate, the kind of sound that lives at the bottom of your ear before it registers as a sound at all. Was that click meant to warn me or lure me? I remember stopping. The footage confirms it. I planted both feet and stood there for almost 20 seconds, head tilted, scanning the tree line to my left. Nothing moved. Nothing was visible. And here's what gets me when I watch it back now. I was looking in exactly the wrong direction. Based on Bigfoot's position the first time the camera caught a glimpse of it, I have a feeling that the Sasquatch was behind me and slightly right, motionless, watching me search for it in the wrong quadrant of forest. I was so confident in my instincts pointing me left that I never thought to turn fully around. Sasquatch used that. Whether it was conscious misdirection or just patience, the result was the same. I looked, found nothing, and kept walking. That's when I reached up and adjusted the GoPro. The clip shows my hand crossing the lens, and for half a second, the camera tilts upward at about 30 degrees, catching the mid-canopy instead of the trail. And I have watched that half-second frame by frame more times than I can count, because that's when Bigfoot appears again. higher now, not on the ground. Sasquatch is in the lower branches of a large oak, maybe 40 feet off the trail, perched in a position that makes zero anatomical sense for something that must weigh upward of 500 pounds. But there it is. And the face. The face is what I can't let go of. It's turned directly toward the camera, not toward me, toward the lens, as if it understood what the lens was. The eyes are deep set and dark, and there is nothing blank about them. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Bigfoot looked like it was thinking. I reattached the mount, the camera leveled back out, and the trail snapped back into frame. And immediately, the clicking returned. But this time, it was louder. The gap between each click had shortened, or maybe it was coming from closer, or both. My body language in the footage shifts visibly. My shoulders come up half an inch. My stride gets tighter. I start scanning left and right with short glances instead of steady forward focus. I know that posture. That's the posture of someone whose nervous system is sending massive red flags that their conscious brain hasn't sorted into words yet. I think that's the moment my instincts started clocking in ahead of my thoughts. I just hadn't caught up yet, and Bigfoot was still right there behind me, closing the gap by degrees. How much closer could it get before I realized I was being hunted? I've spent time in thick backcountry. I've camped alone at elevation, hiked out at 3 in the morning, navigated by feel more than once. The woods have never made me feel small. That changed on this trail, on this morning, and I can pinpoint the exact moment in the footage, the moment my stride broke. Not a stumble, not a stop. Just a half-second hesitation in the rhythm, the kind your body makes when the math stops adding up. One foot came down a little softer than it should have. I picked up my pace, not running, not yet, but moving with the kind of urgency that doesn't come from logic. It comes from somewhere older than logic. The footage starts to shake now. Not badly, just enough to tell you the gait has changed. I'm moving somewhere between a fast walk and a trot, and my head is doing that thing where it keeps flicking backward without fully committing to a look. I remember the feeling exactly. I wanted to look back, and I didn't want to look back, because somewhere in the meat of my brain, I already suspected that looking back would show me something I couldn't unsee. So I kept moving, and Bigfoot kept moving too. What happens next in the footage is the part I had to watch 4 times before I could accept what I was seeing. I had pushed my pace up to something close to a jog, and the camera was bobbing enough to make the background choppy, but not so choppy that you miss it. Behind me, maybe 30 feet back, a shape moves between 2 tree trunks. One smooth, unhurried stride. The spacing between those trunks was at least 8 feet across. Bigfoot cleared that gap in a single step. Not a leap, but just a step. And in the brief moment when the shape was fully visible between the trees, upright, broad, moving with the fluid indifference of something that does not need to rush, I could see it wasn't running. It was walking, just walking, keeping pace with a human jogging. I honestly think, watching it now, that Bigfoot could have caught me whenever it decided to. It was toying with me. That's the thought that sits in my chest like a stone. Was this predator simply patient, or testing me for something worse? Growing up Navajo, I'd been taught to trust the land and to respect what watches from it. Something about the clicks and low rustles behind me set my nerves screaming. I knew this forest better than most. Every fallen log, every narrow deer path was mapped in my head. If I stayed on the main paved trail, it would take at least 20 minutes to reach the parking area. But cutting through this older, tighter forest, I could shave off almost 10 minutes. 10 minutes didn't seem like much, but when Bigfoot is closing in at a pace you can't measure, 10 minutes could be the difference between getting out and getting caught. I made the turn without hesitation, but it wasn't just instinct. My feet carried me left before my mind even fully caught up. I cut hard off the main trail. There's a deer path I've used before, cuts diagonally through a section of older forest and shaves almost a quarter mile off the route back to the parking area. Tighter canopy, rougher ground, but faster if you know it. I knew it. I took it without slowing down, ducking the first low branch by memory and hitting the uneven ground of the old deer path at full stride. The terrain got worse immediately. Exposed roots, soft spots where the soil had gone damp from a creek runoff somewhere below. Branches at shin level that caught my feet if I wasn't lifting high enough. The GoPro captured all of it. the world swinging and jerking as I worked through the brush, my breathing now audible on the mic, ragged but controlled. And then the clicking stopped, just stopped, mid-sequence, as if a switch had been thrown. And the silence that replaced it was worse. Because silence in a forest that has been making sound means something decided to go quiet. I felt the change in the air before I processed the audio shift. Everything around me became very still in the way that prey animals go still when something large has just entered their space. What filled the silence instead was something lower, a rhythmic sound I don't have a clean word for. Not a vocalization, not a knock. More like a deep resonant pressure that hit the chest before the ears. It was spaced out and deliberate. It felt less like communication and more like the sound of something that knew I could hear it and wanted me to know that. I'm not someone who leans into the dramatic, but I will say this plainly. It felt like Bigfoot was controlling the pace. Like the Sasquatch had shifted from observation to something more intentional and was marking time as it came. Was it orchestrating my every move, step by step? I was moving hard through the deer path when I made my worst decision. I slowed down, just a fraction, just enough to try to get a bearing on where the sound was coming from. And in that half second of reduced speed, I turned my head back over my left shoulder. The camera caught what my eyes caught. Bigfoot was there, not 30 feet back this time, not a silhouette between trees. Close enough that I could make out the mass of it moving through the brush toward me with a kind of steady, ground-eating locomotion that looked nothing like a run, but covered ground like one. Sasquatch wasn't hesitating. It wasn't stopping to observe. It was advancing. And the distance between us had collapsed to something that made the word escape feel suddenly fragile. I took off in a full sprint. No more pacing, no more managing my footing on the uneven ground. I just went, and I accepted every stumble and root catch as the cost of forward motion. The GoPro footage from this stretch is chaotic. Sky, ground, branches, blur. But there are frames where the background stabilizes just long enough to see behind me. And in 2 of those frames, Bigfoot is visible, moving through the brush in long, smooth strides, angled toward me, not away. Sasquatch wasn't spooked by the sprint. It responded to it. The pace increased. There was no frantic energy in those strides, no sign of exertion, just the mechanical, metronomic movement of something that was built for this, in terrain that it had known far longer than I had. And the scariest part? He was 10 feet away from me. I've never felt fear like that in my life. I want to be specific about that. I've been in situations in the backcountry that were objectively more dangerous. A rockfall at elevation, a flash flood in a desert canyon, a close encounter with a black bear that ended fine but escalated fast. In all of those, the fear was manageable because the threat followed rules I understood. This was different. This was the specific terror of being pursued by something that was better at the terrain than I was, faster than I was, and not behaving like anything I had a category for. How do you survive when the rules themselves have changed? Then the rocks started. The first one hit the ground to my right with a crack that I felt in my teeth. Not a random falling branch, not a tumbling stone dislodged by movement upstream. It came in from the side, horizontal, at knee height, and struck a root hard enough to split it. I didn't stop. The second one caught my shoulder. It wasn't massive, maybe the size of a baseball, but it hit with enough force to send a spike of pain down into my elbow and throw my balance just enough to make me grab a sapling for support. I used the sapling to pivot and keep my momentum going without going down. The third one caught me in the upper back, mid-stride, and that one nearly buckled me. Bigfoot was throwing them, not rolling them, not kicking them loose. Full on, actually throwing them. Overhead with accuracy, while in motion through heavy brush. I can't tell you exactly how I know the difference, but I know it the same way you know when a punch is aimed versus when it's wild. The rocks were landing in front of me, and beside me, and behind me, and the pattern wasn't random scatter, it was bracketing. Sasquatch was boxing in my path, throwing ahead of where I was headed to steer me. I stumbled over a root, went down on one knee, got back up in what felt like the same motion, and kept running. That's when it landed. Not as a thought at first, more as a sensation, a wrongness in the geometry of where I was versus where I should have been. I'd been running this deer path for almost 4 minutes, and I should have been breaking into the secondary fire road by now. I should have been able to see the open sky ahead through the canopy thinning. Instead, the trees were getting denser. The ground was rising. I was heading northeast instead of northwest, and the only way I had gotten there was by following the path of least resistance when the rocks came in from the sides. Had I already been trapped without realizing it? I wasn't escaping. I was being steered. Every time I'd had to dodge right when a rock hit my left when one hit ahead of me to the right. I had turned incrementally away from the exit. Sasquatch hadn't been trying to hit me cleanly. It had been redirecting me. The rocks were a herding tool. I was deep in the denser section of the forest now, the canopy thick enough that it had dropped the ambient light by a full level, and I had zero visual on any recognizable landmark. I was exactly where Bigfoot wanted me, and it stopped feeling like a chase. It started feeling like something else, something with an endpoint where I am deep in the forest, dead. I forced myself to stop running and think for 3 seconds. 3 seconds, which felt like 3 hours. I pulled up the mental map of the area. The creek ran south, the ridge was east, the parking lot was west and low. I needed to go downhill and left, regardless of what that put between me and whatever was in those trees. I adjusted course, pushing through brush now, instead of following the path, taking the harder route, because the harder route was the right one. Then the rocks stopped entirely, and Bigfoot closed the distance. I know this because I heard it. Not footsteps, not snapping branches, but a single heavy impact on the ground, maybe 15 feet behind me, like something had dropped its full weight forward in one lunge. The sound was so massive and so close that my legs nearly gave out. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I just pushed every last thing I had into my legs and ran harder than I have ever run in my life. And the GoPro footage confirms it. The camera shaking so violently that only every 4th or 5th frame is even decipherable. Was I about to find out just how close it could really get? The footage shows me stumbling badly over an exposed root, catching myself on a tree trunk with my forearm hard enough to leave a bruise that still hurts as I watch this. What the mic caught at that exact moment is something I've had to listen to a dozen times to fully accept. A sound directly behind me, guttural and low. Not a roar, not a scream, just a single deep exhalation of something that was right there. Not 30 feet back, not 20, it was right there. The GoPro audio puts it at maybe 8 feet. If I had gone down on that route, I don't think I would have gotten back up. I hit a slope without warning and went with it, half running, half sliding down a 15-foot grade of loose shale and dead leaves, grabbing at anything to stay upright. My right knee went into the ground, came back up, and I was still moving. That's what the body does when everything else switches off. The slope angled me south, and I took it, because south was away, and away was the only direction that mattered. Behind me on that slope, the footage catches a shape dropping into the upper edge of the frame. Not sliding, not stumbling. It was controlled. Sasquatch came down that grade like it had done it 1,000 times. The trees thinned just slightly ahead. Not a clearing, just older growth with more space between trunks. And I hit that section at full sprint. That's when Bigfoot made its move. The footage shows a shadow crossing fast from my right, cutting in at an angle, closing the gap with sudden acceleration I hadn't seen from it before. Sasquatch had been pacing itself. The whole time, it had been pacing itself, and now it wasn't. Could I survive a sudden burst from something built to outlast me? But before we get into that, you need to see this, because I found something else while watching this footage. Evidence and more discoveries that I can't put on YouTube. Things that were taken down, ignored, or completely removed. I gathered everything into one file. If you want to see it, it's in the description. Now back to the story. I screamed. Didn't plan to. It just came out, raw and primal, captured perfectly on the GoPro mic. I cut left so hard my feet nearly crossed, and I almost went down, barely staying upright, through something closer to controlled falling than running. Bigfoot adjusted instantly. The footage shows the shadow shifting course to match me. The gap now under 20 feet, the canopy shaking from its movement overhead in one frame. Overhead, like it had used a low branch as a pivot point. The geometry of it didn't make sense for something that size, and it didn't matter because it was happening. My lungs were burning in a way I hadn't felt ever. The footing was wet from creek drainage seeping up through the soil, and every third step my foot slid before catching. I could feel Bigfoot back there, not as a sound anymore, but as pressure. The way air moves differently when something large displaces it. Sasquatch was close enough that I could feel the wake of it. I've told people this, and they look at me like I'm exaggerating. I'm not. A branch caught me across the face. When I ran directly into it full speed, split my lower lip, and filled my mouth with blood. I didn't slow down. My vision went briefly white at the edges, and I didn't slow down. The footage from this stretch is almost unusable, just violent shaking and strobing light through branches. But in one clear frame, you can see Bigfoot's arm, not its whole body. Its arm extended, reaching. It was close enough to reach. That frame is the one I can barely look at because the hand is open. I would have been gone. I don't know if I made a sound when I saw what was ahead. A gray light through the trees, diffuse, flat, the specific quality of light that means open sky and open ground. A clearing. I hit the brush at the edge without slowing, ducked under a low branch by instinct, and exploded out the other side at a dead sprint and ran directly into a human being. The collision was violent. I hit him shoulder first at full running speed, and we both went down, him backwards into a tarp of gear, me rolling hard over his torso and landing on my hands in the dirt. Two other men spun around at the sound, and for one suspended second, everybody froze. Me on the ground, blood on my lip, chest heaving, him flat on his back in his own equipment, the other two with their hands halfway to things at their hips. The gear on the tarp was not recreational. Poachers, mid-setup, and I had crashed into the middle of their operation like a man falling out of the sky. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then one of them barked something low at the others, and they all turned toward the tree line I'd just come through. I turned too. Nothing. No sound. No movement. No shape at the edge of the clearing. Bigfoot was gone. Fully, completely gone. As if the sight of armed humans had ended the calculation mid-step. I stood there with my hands shaking and understood with total clarity that I had not made it out because I outran something. I made it out because something decided to stop. I pulled the footage that night. I watched it 3 times straight through and couldn't sleep. What I found in those early frames, Bigfoot already there, 10 feet behind me. Watching didn't shock me. What shocked me was the last frame. Sasquatch in the trees, eyes locked on me, arm reaching forward as if it could snatch me at any second. Watching it now, I can still feel that intent pressing in. And I know, if I'd hesitated for even a second, Bigfoot would have finished the job. That's the part that haunts me. Stellan Vare had worked on investigative cases for 11 years. A timber called him 4 days after their bulldozer went missing from a contested logging site in the Six Rivers National Forest in Northern California. Not stolen, not broken down, but missing in the sense that pieces of it had been found in 3 separate locations and nobody could explain how they had gotten there or what had been strong enough to separate them from the rest of the machine. The first step was collecting the camera grid the logging crew had already installed. Before he even walked the terrain or studied topographic maps, Stellan drove the access roads and flagged each motion-activated trail camera the loggers had mounted around the worksite and along the road where the machine had last been confirmed operational. The company had placed them weeks earlier to document equipment activity and keep records during the dispute, which meant the cameras had been watching the area long before the bulldozer disappeared. Over the years, those cameras had captured bears wandering through cut blocks, vandals slipping past locked gates, poachers checking game trails, and the occasional lost hiker cutting through timber roads after dark. In 11 years of reviewing footage like that, they had never recorded anything that made Stellan sit in his truck and replay the same clip multiple times before he could bring himself to step outside. Camera 4 was positioned along the edge of a dense section of old-growth Douglas fir, mounted at chest height on a tree just off the service road that ran along the upper logging boundary. The footage was 1 minute and 39 seconds long. Stellan had watched it on the small screen of his laptop, parked at the edge of that same service road with the engine off and the afternoon light coming in flat through the windshield. How could less than 2 minutes of footage contain the answer to a mystery that had already scattered a bulldozer across the forest? The first seconds showed the road at the point where it curved past the tree line before opening into the staging area. The light was poor. A heavy overstory kept the ground mostly in shadow, with a few narrow shafts coming through at angles, shifting slightly as the branches moved in a high wind that couldn't quite reach the ground. For the first 2 seconds, there was nothing. Then something moved in the shadows between the trees, and Stellan felt his body go still in a way it did not usually go still. What kind of thing moves through a dark forest at that size and that speed and doesn't bother to stay in the shadows? A Sasquatch stepped into one of the narrow shafts of light, and the light was enough. It was upright. It was massive. Reddish-brown hair covered it from head to foot, dense and layered, the coat thickest across the shoulders and upper back, where it bunched and shifted with each stride. It moved with the kind of weight that you don't fake, not the performed heaviness of someone trying to walk large, but the deep structural weight of something that has never once in its life needed to consider what might be bigger than it. Every step compressed the road surface with a finality that had nothing theatrical in it. Stellan's first thought, embarrassingly, was that the camera had malfunctioned. Some trick of the lens, a compression artifact, something that would resolve into a bear or a downed tree if he just let it settle. His second thought arrived about a half-second later, when the full figure came into the light, and the scale of it became undeniable, and that second thought had no words attached to it. His hands had gone still on the laptop keyboard. He was not aware of deciding to stop moving. He just had. If the footage wasn't a malfunction, then what exactly was Stellan watching walk across the same road he was parked beside? 8 feet tall, at minimum. He had done enough outdoor work, enough time measuring elk trails and bear markings against known reference points, to have a decent eye for height and scale, and he had never been far off. This was 8 feet, possibly a shade more, and he arrived at that number without having to think hard about it. The dead fur it passed at 11 seconds gave him his reference. The top of its head cleared a branch he could later measure at 7 feet 9 inches from the ground. The shoulders were the part that most resisted any effort to file it under something normal. A human being, even a very large one, has shoulders that fit inside a certain range, a range defined by the width of the skeleton beneath them, by the limits of what muscle can do to that frame. These did not fit inside that range. They were impossibly wide, rolling forward slightly with each stride in a way that suggested the whole upper body was built around a different set of proportions entirely. And the arms that hung from them were long in a way that had nothing to do with any human proportion Stellan had a reference for. They swung past the knees in a slow, heavy rhythm, each pendulum arc covering more distance than it should, the kind of rhythm that belongs to something that covers a lot of ground with very little effort, something that has never needed to hurry because hurrying has never been the point. If this forest was its territory, how long had it been watching the machines come through and tear it up? And how long had it been deciding what to do about them? Stellan watched it and noticed where it was going, the staging area. The bulldozer sat at the far edge of the service road where the crew had left it the previous evening, blade down, engine cold, sitting on the same packed gravel it had been sitting on when the operator signed off. The Sasquatch was walking directly toward it, with the same purposeful, unhurried gait it had held since the moment it entered the frame. There was no detour, no hesitation, no slowing to assess the open ground or the unfamiliar terrain of the cleared road. It was walking toward that machine the way a person walks toward something they have already made a decision about. The decision had been made somewhere else before the camera ever picked it up, and what was happening now was simply the execution. The gait was unhurried. That detail landed harder than the size. A Sasquatch that large, moving in the open along a service road, and there was no urgency in it at all, no scan of the terrain, no checking of angles, none of the low-level alertness that wild animals carry through their bodies even at rest. Why would a wild creature move across an open road without even the smallest trace of caution? Wild animals are always, on some level, listening. Even the ones at the top of the food chain have something residual in them, some background process running beneath behavior, keeping a loose inventory of the environment. Bigfoot had none of that. It moved through the space the way you move through your own house in the dark, unhurried and unafraid, because every part of the space is already known. This was the pace of something that knew exactly where it was going and had no particular reason to rush. At 18 seconds, Bigfoot slowed, just slightly, and its head turned, not toward the camera, toward the staging area ahead, where the machine sat in the fading afternoon light at the edge of the cleared ground. It held that angle for about 2 seconds, then turned back and kept walking. The motion was so specific and so calm that Stellan watched it 3 times before he allowed himself to move on. Not assessment, not curiosity. It already knew the machine was there. The head turn was something else, the particular quality of attention you give to something you have been thinking about for a while and are now almost close enough to reach. Stellan had seen that quality in human subjects on surveillance footage. He had not expected to see it here. At 31 seconds, the service road passed under a gap in the canopy where a large tree had come down at some point, and the wider beam of light that came through that gap caught the hair across Bigfoot's shoulders in detail. Individual strands moved in a faint breeze, each at its own speed, the longer ones catching more air and moving further, the shorter ones barely shifting. It was the movement of real hair on a living body, not costume material, not anything synthetic, but actual biological material, each strand independent, responding to a small amount of air moving through the forest the way any animal's coat would respond to it. Stellan had worked enough wildlife cases to know what hair looked like on a large animal in natural light, and what he was seeing in those 2 seconds matched that in a way that he could not argue himself out of. It kept walking. The bulldozer was visible now at the far right margin of the camera's field. The wide blade, the upper cab structure, the bulk of the machine sitting exactly where the crew had left it. Bigfoot moved into the cleared staging ground, and the camera held its full profile. The cone-shaped skull, the heavy brow ridge above the flat face, the wide shoulders rolling forward in that consistent stride. It was still moving without any change of pace. It had not slowed. It had not stopped to evaluate. Whatever it intended to do when it reached that machine, the decision was already behind it, made and settled somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, not something it was still working out as it crossed the open ground. If the decision had already been made hours earlier, what had convinced it that the bulldozer needed to be dealt with? At 45 seconds, Bigfoot stopped. The stop was total. Not a slow deceleration, not a shift of weight, but an immediate halt, the way a body stops when it has arrived at the thing it came for. It was standing at the front of the bulldozer. The machine came up to roughly its mid-chest. Stellan had the dimensions of a bulldozer memorized from the case file. Operating weight around 20,000 pounds. Blade width 14 feet. Cab height just under 10 feet to the exhaust stack. He held those numbers in his head and looked at the Sasquatch standing in front of it and felt something happen in the back of his mind that was not comfortable. Then the head turned, not toward the machine, toward the camera. It found the lens with the same precision it had found its destination, directly, without a search, without the half-second of scanning that would have been present if it hadn't already known where to look. Bigfoot's eyes found the lens and held it. How long had it known the camera was there before it decided to look at it? The expression on the face was not what he would have expected. There was no startle in it, no alarm, none of the wide-eye tension that comes through clearly on any large mammal when it encounters something unexpected. The expression was flat, unreadable in the specific way that a face becomes unreadable when the emotion behind it is something unfamiliar. Not the absence of expression, but an expression that had no match in anything Stellan knew how to read. If the creature wasn't surprised by the camera or the machine, then what exactly had it come here expecting to find? If he had to name it, and he resisted doing so, he would have called it acknowledgement. The eye contact lasted 3 seconds. Midway through those 3 seconds, there was a small movement in the irises, a slight shift in the direction of gaze, not dramatic, not a full look away, but the micro-movement that happens when a brain is actively working behind the eyes. Bigfoot was not staring, not frozen, but processing the camera with the same deliberate efficiency it had applied to everything else in its path. Whatever the camera represented, the evaluation was brief. It had been located, classified, and deprioritized in the span of 3 seconds, and then it was simply no longer the focus. That kind of response, finding a thing, deciding about it, continuing, is not the behavior of instinct. Instinct is louder and less precise. What happened at 45 seconds was a decision. After 3 seconds, Bigfoot turned back to the machine. Stellan stayed on the frame. The moment just after the eye contact ended and the Sasquatch turned its attention back to the bulldozer. For a long time, the way you stay on a frame when some part of you is hoping the pause will give the image somewhere else to go. He had reviewed hundreds of hours of trail camera footage over 11 years. He had seen wildlife, vandals, trespassers, livestock. He had a working vocabulary for what human damage looked like and what animal damage looked like and where the boundary between them sat. He had never once, in 11 years, expected to need a category on the other side of both of those things at once. If the answer to the bulldozer damage didn't fit human behavior or animal behavior, what exactly had Stellan been hired to investigate? At 59 seconds, it started. Bigfoot placed both hands against the front blade of the dozer. Not a strike, a placement, deliberate and measured, with the flat of both palms against the upper edge of the steel, fingers curling slightly over the lip. There was no wind-up. There was no gathering of effort, no widening of the stance, no visible bracing. The body didn't shift. It just applied force, and the blade moved. Stellan watched it and thought about the numbers. To move something that heavy from a standing position with no leverage, no running start, no equipment of any kind, through the application of hand pressure alone, he could not finish the calculation in a way that came out as possible. He watched it happen on the screen anyway. The machine rocked backward. Not dramatically, not a catastrophic lurch, a single authoritative rock, the tracks on the far side lifting a few inches off the ground before the weight came back down. The settling impact when it came back down was audible on the microphone. Bigfoot had not moved. Its feet were in the same position. Its posture was the same. It had pushed 20,000 pounds backward a measurable distance without leaning into it, and whatever that had cost it was not visible anywhere on its body. Then it gripped the blade and pulled. The sound the microphone captured at 1 minute and 4 seconds was not a sound Stellan had a reference for. It was metal under stress. The particular dense, tearing quality of structural steel separating at points it was not designed to separate at, layered over a lower, sustained groan that was the frame of the machine responding to a force it had not been engineered to withstand. If the frame of the bulldozer was already failing under the strain, how much more of it could the creature take apart? The blade came away in 2 pieces. The first piece went somewhere to the left, out of frame. The second piece the Sasquatch held in one hand, examined briefly in the way you examine a thing that has just come apart in a manner that surprises you slightly, and then set down on the ground beside the machine with a precision that was almost careful. He replayed those 4 seconds 6 times. What he was looking for, what part of his brain kept insisting had to be there, was some visible exertion in the body, some shift of the hips, some drop of the shoulder, some change of breath visible in the chest or the rib cage. In any large animal under load, you can read the effort. The spine curves toward the resistance. The legs drive into the ground. Something moves that tells you the body is working against something that requires working against. None of that was present. The Sasquatch had removed a steel blade from a 20,000-pound dozer, and the only thing that changed in its body was the position of its arms. Stellan had no explanation for that. He had no framework that could hold it. He just watched it again, and the footage kept showing him the same thing it had shown him every previous time. If the evidence refused to change no matter how many times he replayed it, how was he supposed to explain it to the people who had hired him? He looked at the paused frame on his laptop screen, the machine with its blade gone, the Sasquatch standing beside it with what had been solid welded structural steel lying in 2 pieces in the gravel, and thought about every equipment damage case he had worked that ended with a clear explanation and how none of them had pointed anywhere near here. Most equipment damage in wilderness had one of 4 causes. vandalism, weather, mechanical failure, or transportation accident. He had never once, in 11 years, needed a fifth category. He sat in the truck for probably 2 minutes without moving, and then he started the clip again. Bigfoot moved down the left side of the machine. The same unhurried gait, the same absence of urgency, walking the length of the dozer the way a person walks the length of something they are inspecting and taking inventory of. At the track assembly, it stopped and crouched, and Stellan lost the upper body to the camera angle. And then there was a sound like a rifle shot, and the camera image shook from the vibration of it, and when the Sasquatch stood back up and kept walking, it was carrying a section of track chain that weighed, by Stellan's later estimate, somewhere between 400 and 500 pounds. It carried it one-handed, the chain hanging in a loose loop from its fist, swinging slightly with each stride in the way things swing when they are being carried by something that does not find their weight particularly notable. It stood at the far end of the machine and held still. It had done something deliberate, and now it was simply standing with the chain at its side, upright and without any shift of weight, in the specific stillness that is different from rest. Not the stillness of something that has stopped because it is tired. The stillness of something that has stopped because it is done with one part and is now considering the next. If this was only one step in a process, what part of the machine would it decide to remove next? The force required to produce what the microphone had captured was not something he could talk himself past. He had worked enough outdoor cases to have a working understanding of what a large body in motion sounds like when it connects with a solid surface, when it bends steel, when it removes load-bearing components from machinery designed to operate in the harshest available terrain. What he had heard from 1 minute and 4 seconds onward was not close to anything a human being was capable of producing without cutting equipment, without time, without preparation of any kind. The effort simply did not register on the Sasquatch's body. Nothing changed in its face. Nothing changed in its posture. It had torn the blade off a 20,000-pound machine and removed a section of track assembly and was now holding 500 pounds of chain in one fist, with the same affect as someone holding a set of car keys. It swung what it had removed as if this required roughly the same amount of attention as opening a door, and then it stood and looked at the rest of the machine, and the expression on its face was the particular blankness of something that is deciding what comes next. If removing a bulldozer blade registered the same way opening a door did, what would actually constitute effort for something like this? The waiting was the part that resisted any clean explanation. This was not random destruction. It was not territorial aggression in any documented form. It was not feeding behavior. It was something that looked, from the outside, like work. A job being done with professional composure by something that knew exactly what it was doing and had no need to rush through it. Bigfoot had arrived at a specific machine and was working through it with the methodical attention of something that had a clear idea of what it wanted the end state to look like. All of that had the shape of intention, of a plan formed somewhere else in the dark and the quiet of this forest, and now simply being executed one component at a time with no wasted motion and no visible exertion. Stellan had been on enough investigative calls to know the difference between damage caused by force and damage caused by intention. Force leaves patterns that are directional and predictable. The vectors of an impact, the trajectory of a slide, the failure points of metal stressed beyond its rating. Intention leaves patterns that are selective. A machine stripped of specific components, left in a specific condition, arranged in a way that suggests the end state was the objective from the beginning. What Camera 4 had captured had the shape of intention, from the moment the Sasquatch placed its palms against the blade to the moment it stood with the track chain in its fist. And it was the most unsettling thing Stellan had encountered in 11 years of work that occasionally turned up unsettling things. He thought about that while he watched the clip a second time. The components had been removed in a sequence that made a kind of structural sense. The blade first, which bore the weight of the forward end. The track section next, which compromised the machine's mobility. If you wanted to disable a bulldozer permanently, If you wanted to render it irreparable rather than merely inoperative, that was roughly the order in which a knowledgeable person would work. He did not know what to do with the implication of that. He set it to the side and kept watching. If the sequence mirrored how a trained operator would disable a machine, how did the Sasquatch know where to start? At 1 minute and 14 seconds, the tree line on the far side of the staging area moved. Not the way wind moves a tree line, not a general wave-like shift of branches and upper canopy. The movement was low and specific, the kind that comes from a large body pushing through dense brush, and it happened at a single point in the tree line directly across the staging area from where Bigfoot stood. A second Sasquatch stepped out. Stellan's first impression was size, and his second impression was that his first impression had been wrong because he had used the first Bigfoot as his baseline for large. The second Sasquatch was bigger, noticeably, significantly bigger. He estimated somewhere between 9.5 and 10 feet, broader across the chest and shoulders, the coat darker, almost black in the shadows at the edge of the staging area, and shifting toward a very deep brown, only when it moved far enough into the light. Each step carried a mass that was visible in the way the ground responded, in the way the gravel compressed and shifted with each footfall. If the first one had already dismantled part of the machine alone, what could the larger one do when it reached it? It moved directly to the dozer cab. No inspection, no pause. It gripped the cab structure at the roofline with both hands, and what it did next happened in the same quiet, businesslike way everything had happened since the first Bigfoot walked into frame. The cab came off the frame, not twisted, not folded, separated cleanly at the mounting points, lifted away from the machine as a unit, and set down on the far side of the clearing with the same considered placement the first Sasquatch had used when it set down the blade section. The roll cage was still intact, the seat was still inside it. The whole assembly sat upright on the gravel, and the machine beneath it was open to the sky, its internal workings exposed to the forest air, as if the cab had simply been removed for maintenance by someone who knew exactly which bolts to pull. The two Sasquatches stood in the staging area and faced what remained of the dozer. There was no sound between them on the microphone, no vocalization, no clicking, no signal of any kind. They stood in the remaining light with the stripped machine between them, and they were still, and whatever was happening between them did not require sound. If they weren't communicating out loud, how had they coordinated the work so precisely? Then the larger one looked up. It found the camera immediately. The head came up, and the eyes went directly to the lens without a scan, without a search, without the delay that would have been present if it didn't already know where to look. It held eye contact for 3 seconds, the same duration as the first Sasquatch, and the expression Stellan saw on its face across that brief span of footage was not curiosity. It was not alarm. It was something that he kept turning over in his mind on the drive back south and could not find a better word for than acknowledgement. Not surprise that the camera was there, not aggression toward it, something closer to the look a person gives when they notice they are being watched and want you to know they noticed. The clip ended. 99 seconds of footage, and Stellan had no idea what to do with any of it. If the creatures knew they were being watched, had the camera captured exactly what they wanted someone to see? The Halverson equipment had been at that site for 3 weeks. Whatever had been decided about it had been decided somewhere in that window, in the old-growth forest above the staging area, in the dark, with no documentation of any kind, no record of the deliberation, no way to read the outcome, until Camera 4 picked up the result in 1 minute and 39 seconds of footage. This was not a territorial behavior that happened to be caught on camera. It was a territorial behavior that was delivered to one. They had not been surprised by his equipment. They had used it. The destruction was not something that Stellan's investigation had uncovered. It was something that had been staged for his investigation, or for whoever came after him, or for the footage to eventually reach whoever at the Halverson Timber Company had the authority to decide whether the machines went back in.